Hello viewers, again, this is my lecture on the Golden Bough, part 5. For those of you just tuning in, I put links to the previous videos below in the description. Part 5 begins the role of scientific law as an agent of historical change stands against the traditional view of a God who gradually reveals himself to the world through different periods in history. Now, this relates back to the graph that I had earlier drawn behind me, where we saw how the decrease in human agency over the divine and things such as magic gradually decreases as a culture begins to accept natural law, so that magic becomes replaced with an internal religious practice such as communion, such as prayer, such as sacrifice, and so on and so forth, as opposed to magical incantations designed to take ownership or persuade deities and other supernatural creatures. Frazer argues that man's relationship with the supernatural world evolved from a state of supreme power on the part of man and a meek status on supernatural beings to a state of meekness on the part of man and supreme power to the spiritual beings of his world, and the mechanism by which the evolution moved forward was a steadily increasing understanding of natural law. Therefore, a society in which religion accepts natural law must place prayer and sacrifice above the practice of ritual magic in order to make this power dynamic obvious. It assumes that knowledge of natural law is a type of spiritual maturity, which is a reversed method of viewing religious history. Religion naturally posits that there was a primordial union with the divinity that has been lost in history and must be rediscovered through religious practice. The idea of a forward teleology instead of a cyclical one is unreligious. We see the best, in Western history, the best example of this comes down to us from Iside in his Works and Days, where he shows the ages moving in cycles according to the different types of metal, from the gold to the iron, and so on and so forth, thus creating the idea of a return through religious practice. The return exits history and enters into a sacred space where the religion is properly understood. To force religion into a strictly linear history loses this dynamic that must be appreciated in the study of religion. The decentralization of classical syncretism in the early 20th century attempts to use Jungian archetypes in the same way that ancient Greek authors used their own gods as ways of determining the religious quality of their neighbors. Classical syncretism naturally posits that behind the names of pagan deities there is a set of known gods which can be used to understand all cultures by how close their worship is to their Greek counterpart. To decentralize this notion means setting even the Greek gods as names put on universal archetypes so that no one culture has the locus of religious meaning. Okay. Now, these innovations in decentralizing and decentralizing Greek syncretism come down to us by the work of Jung and to some degree by Jordan Peterson, who applied the system of archetypes to Frazer's work, whether directly or indirectly, by using his massive evidence as a way to prove the existence of individual archetypes in individual religions. Now, for Frazer, the archetypes latent in the collective subconscious of the human race are rather trends explained by historical rather than psychological propositions. Frazer's ideas on this history of religion are locked in the historical view of linear time rather than the cyclical view of religious time. Therefore, although persuasive in his logic, the arguments lack connection to any sort of philosophical model which could be called the structure of their origin within mankind itself. In order to ground these religious trends in such a model, it would take the work of Carl Jung to show the existence of archetypal religious ideas outside the movement of historical time. Okay. Time to graph what this means. First off, we'll start off with the idea of the gods in a decentralized syncretic model. Okay. So these are the components of the pagan deity and the universal and the decentralized syncretic system. So we have an archetype that defines the deity. The deity is naturally the details put on an archetype by a culture in order to make the archetype unique to that culture. Okay, an archetype alone, without these differentiations given to it by a class of deity, cannot feel connected. Okay, the connection it feels to a culture, the connection that a culture feels to it can only happen when the deity takes on these details ascribed to it by a given culture. That's what makes the connection possible. And of course, a name describes the deity, but it does not describe the archetype. The archetype is what exists underneath, in this case, behind the deity. So, for the Greeks, they had a deity which was also the archetype. And the name. And this This did not have an archetype because foreign ideas placed on top of it, such as different names, informed the Greeks of what sort of deviations other cultures were making towards their own concept of truth in order for barbarous peoples to be able to contemplate Greek wisdom. The Greeks are always higher than the barbarians. So this brings the Greeks down to the level of everybody because the archetypes are universal. This whole system is built on the idea that Carl Jung, and Frazer Jung and Frazer that Jung understood, in part by understanding the quantity of examples and massive evidence compiled by Frazer, who should be remembered as a great compiler. Jung applied religious time to this body of evidence in order to better understand how the archetypal systems of deities, which I just explained, apply to a universal religion of all mankind. Now, this is the arrow of time, also history. Okay, this is so we have the primordial beginning, and the arrow of time moves history or progress or linear progress forward. Okay, what Jung does is takes the primordial beginning and the arrow of time and applies the moment of religious practice as a way to return to the primordial beginning. Okay. For Frazer, there is only the increase of natural law across linear time. For Jung, there still is an arrow of time, but that arrow of time can go back to this primordial beginning era through religious practice. And religious practice is defined by the details of the archetypes in a given culture. Frazer's role in the history of the decentralization of classical syncretism was principally as a data collector who meticulously paved the way for Carl Jung, whose own work would later inspire Joseph Campbell, and then in the 21st century, Dr. Jordan Peterson, who initiated the return of true Jungian psychoanalysis into academic research methodology.